Hello and welcome to another special episode of the Tigers Down Under. We're doing the 2010s flashback series, back for another episode. I think that actually should say episode 6. It's the. Oh, I think I got the wrong title on there. It should say City Promoted. It shouldn't say Steve Bruce joins. But anyway, we are back for another episode of the 2010s flashbacks. We're doing the second half of the 2012-2013 season. And I have Logan. How are you, Logan?
Alex, doing really well, and very excited about recapping this season for obvious reasons.
Yeah, some very special memories that season. We sort of covered, I think it was yourself and myself covering the first half of the season. Last time we did this, we finished off with that Leeds game where we beat them 2-0 at the MKM, I believe that was, to cap off a pretty stellar first half of the season. And we're back to cover the second half of the season and how the season ended up. And we've got the picture here, of course, of the promotion party at the KC Stadium as it was then, as we won promotion to the Premier League by the automatic spots for the first time in our history. We'll sort of talk about the games and the memories and all that sort of thing, but I guess it does make sense just to start with memories of that day, that 2-2 draw with Cardiff, the drama that went with it, the Leeds game as well, that the 15-minute delay that meant that we were sort of hanging out waiting for that Watford result after our game had finished. Take me through your memories of it.
Yeah, look, it was just an incredible game for so many reasons, just the ups and downs. And I think that, as you said, it was so much about what we actually witnessed at the MKM or the KCOM, or actually it was the KC Stadium at the time, such as the amount of rebranding we've had with that particular stadium. But as you said, there was two games that crucially depended on what was happening. And the anticlimax of the penalty, it looked for all money that we'd pulled off the miraculous, and then obviously the last minute goal, the pitch invasion, and then I think most famously is probably El Mohammadi's dancing, and maybe the starry-eyed look in a very young Robbie Brady's face. It was very clear what that particular moment meant to them. And I think that particular playing group had realized what they had achieved. And I'm not sure that when you think about the second half of the season, it was actually something that the playing group, genuinely believed was going to happen, because it was a much shakier second part of the season. So I think the realization of promotion being achieved in the manner that it was certainly a heart-stopping day. And I don't think it's one that we will ever forget.
Yeah, that's right. I think just about out of any game of Cities that I can remember, that's the game with the most up and down emotions. Obviously, FA Cup final probably rivals it to an extent, but this one, having the happy ending, was probably more fond in the memory bank. But you sort of go from Fraser Campbell scoring the first goal to put Cardiff 1-0 up, and you think, oh, we've sort of thrown away the chance. Then we've got Proschwitz equalising, and then McShane, as we heard on the intro music there, putting us ahead 2-1. Then we win the penalty to go up 3-1, and you think we've sealed it. And I think, we had some supporters going onto the pitch, and Bruce getting a bit annoyed, quite rightly, because it sort of disrupted that momentum. And then, of course, David Marshall, future City goalkeeper, saving the penalty, and then Cardiff going down the other end and winning a penalty of their own. It was sort of a weird. I remember it was like that 2-week period. There was 3 games. I think there was a game in League One and then 2 in the Championship, all of which had a penalty awarded down one end and then a goal down the other end. I think Leicester against Watford in the semi-final, the playoffs had similar the following week. So it was sort of a very dramatic couple of weeks in the football leagues in that sense as well. But yeah, as we said as well, just, watching the players reacting to that Leeds game and the way it finished afterwards, and you're sort of sitting there at 2-2 full time, not really knowing whether we're up or not. And it was just that anxiety of waiting for that other game to finish. And of course, Leeds doing us a favour by scoring against Watford in that game. It was just, unbelievable to go up via the automatic spots. I think the playoffs are always a more enjoyable path to go if you are to get promoted, but to go up automatically, no stress, and just to be able to enjoy it.
Yeah, certainly. And I keep thinking about, as you've kind of, pressed me on this, I think it's about a 5-minute highlights package that actually sums up the last day, and it's got, it's fitted in with Burnsy's commentary, and just the magnitude of the day and the twists and turns. I think that, we've mentioned a few of them, but when you actually go back and watch that 5-minute clip and see some of the key moments in the game, there was just so much drama that you forget actually what took place. You can
Yeah.
remember a few, but until you actually sit and watch it in its entirety, it reminds you of just how big a day it truly was.
Yeah, that's right. And in this series, we also talk about some of the football shirts that we might have collected from that era, and we're both wearing shirts from that season. So maybe I'll get your thoughts, your comments first on your shirt and what motivated you to get. I think you were saying, is it a Ghetto shirt?
It's a Ghetto shirt, and it was, such was that Egyptian influence. I mean, similar to, I don't want to foretell too many stories when we're going back for a flashback, but it certainly reigns very similar to what we're seeing with the Turkish influx of supporters, with the recent change in ownership. But the amount of support, and I guess the just the hype that came with the signings, particularly it was the catch line of, if you want to score a goal, get Ghetto on the phone. And I can't remember exactly for the words, but you just saw thousands of Egyptians with their fingers up, next to their ears, suggesting that they were calling Ghetto for a goal. And he certainly had that influence where there were some really crucial games in the build up to that, particularly in that part of the season, where I remember vividly, it was the early kickoff, so it finished about 9 o'clock, and I remember the anxious 15-minute window where I would have started work and still just be checking my phone madly. And I remember, Ghetto popped up for a few really late goals that end up being crucial. And I mean, let's not overlook El Mohammadi as well, who was probably, definitely the first Egyptian at City, and the influence he had. I'm pretty sure this was the season where he got recalled halfway through.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
And then we ended up getting him back. So, the role that he played in the final parts of that season. But I do remember Ghetto just being incredibly influential and scoring some critical goals. And he did come in the package with Ahmed Fathi, I believe.
Yeah, so, yeah. He played all of. I think he played one game. He played against Wolves and never played that much for us again. But no, Ghetto. I mean, I have that clear memory because this was sort of the I wouldn't say pre-Twitter days necessarily. It's probably the first season maybe that I was following results on Twitter or BBC. You'd get the flash BBC updates, walking to work in the morning, getting off the train. I think it was the Derby game where he scored a really late goal to give us the win in that one. And certainly there was a number of games like that he scored in a row. We'll talk about Ghetto more in a little bit when we get to the signings. But, it's funny because I also I've got El Mohammadi on the back of this shirt. So we clearly both went for the Egyptian loanees. And I feel like it's interesting that we've both got loanees on the backs of our shirts, because generally I would say that you wouldn't necessarily pick a loanee to get the name of, because they're not going to be around long term necessarily. They might, you don't necessarily know what impact they'll have at the club. But such was Ghetto and such was Elmo's influences that we've clearly both been influenced to get them on the backs of our shirts. And I guess for me at the time getting Elmo, I thought surely we're going to get him on a permanent deal. And as you sort of said there was the issues where he got recalled by Sunderland for I think a week. They might have played him in the cup or something like that. And we just kind of bit the bullet and got him on a permanent. But ended up being a pretty decent player for us as well. So a good player on the back of the shirt. Before we talk about the signings, we did have a couple of players leave that half of the season as well. I think probably the most noteworthy of them were these two. Liam Cooper leaving in January. Of course, now we know him as the Leeds player in the Premier League for them. One of that sort of group of players who sort of broke through and debuted in the Premier League for us under Phil Brown, and then kind of, I guess, fell out of favour or just didn't get the opportunities in the Championship under a few successive managers. And then also Andy Dawson leaving in the summer, so just after the promotion as well. And I would say he's the only player I can think of at least who served 10 years at the club in recent times. I know McShane probably got pretty close, but Dawson's probably one of our longer serving players in recent times as well. So Dawson, obviously a much more significant departure, but two departures probably in that half of the season.
Yeah, Liam Cooper's a really interesting one because I guess, knowing what we know about him now and the career that he's gone on to have, I was probably, in some ways people may have looked at that as a huge scout that got away. But in reality, when you think about who was occupying the central defensive positions, there was Abdullah Faye was there. We had Alex Bruce, who was in stellar form at that stage.
Jack Hobbs as well.
Jack Hobbs was there. It was a time. James Chester as well, I believe.
Chester as well, and McShane, of course, who played in the Cardiff game.
That's right. And so, in hindsight, at the time, it would be really hard pressed to make a case that, that Liam Cooper should be starting. So, I mean, fair play to him. He's gone on and had a wonderful career. But yeah, Andy Dawson was certainly the player here that was one of those City cult heroes that always, always lived up to the legacy that he created for himself. And City fans are still to this day, have very, very positive memories of Andy Dawson and just that working class effort. He was so reliable, and I guess he was remembered for his time in the Premier League, but ultimately he was also the man that probably secured our strong ties in the option of getting Michael Dawson to the club as well,
right.
which was a great signing. So Andy Dawson, I don't think we can really say enough for how he is remembered and how fondly he was considered by the City faithful.
Yeah, that's right. And is he the under-23s coach now? Oh, I think he's involved in the youth setup at the moment. I could be wrong on his exact position. I think he's the under-23s coach. So
I know that
good to have him.
Yeah, he definitely had a role at the club. I'm not sure where that sits to this day, but yeah, most likely.
Yeah. We also then, there we've got the telephone celebration from Ghetto there. So we had two massive incomings. We also had a couple of loanees as well, in the form of, we had Brady signing on a permanent, and then Faddy and Ghetto, as we're saying. Elmo rejoining on a loan, I think, after that recall from Sunderland. I can't actually remember. Maybe the permanent was in the summer after we got promoted. And George Boyd as well, joining from Peterborough. Both of these guys making a sort of pretty instant impact upon their signings. Probably faded a little bit after that, but it was sort of that initial boost that we got from them that was what really got us over the line in a number of the games. Ghetto, I think it was 4 or 5 games in a row where he scored a goal. Boyd scoring the goal against Huddersfield, which just about, you would say, got us up. It was probably the most significant win in that second half of the season in that sense. But yeah, two super players in that second half of the season.
Oh, absolutely. And I know we've already talked about Ghetto, but it's just, even as you said, I think it was 5 games in a row in which he featured on the score sheet. And for that to happen in the Championship is an incredible run, and particularly for an overseas player to come in and to, that people talk about how difficult the Championship is to play in, the physicality of it. And so the impact that he made was will be remembered for a long time. The funniest memory that I still have of George Boyd, and I wouldn't say that it's a unique memory, but I'm pretty sure, and this may have been the season after, was when he was. I think Nottingham Forest wanted to buy him.
Yeah.
The manager didn't end up taking him because he failed an eye test.
With the glasses, yeah.
And so when he scored against them, he ran over to the Nottingham Forest fans and gave the shadow glasses. And I thought that's just an incredibly satisfying moment for him personally. And it's probably what I'll remember him for. But I do actually remember one thing about George Boyd is Steve Bruce chased him incredibly hard. It was a player that he'd been linked with for a long, long time. And when he finally got his man, Steve Bruce was full of praise of George Boyd. He really rated him as a footballer.
Yeah, it's probably that goal against Huddersfield, the celebration, as you said, and then sort of jumping ahead a bit to the next season. But there was that assist for Aluko's winner at Newcastle, and I think it was the goal against Swansea. I think that 1-0 game against Swansea to keep us up. So he's got a couple of those 1-0 goals to get us decent results. So that's probably the overwhelming memories. And it's a shame when you think about the fact he was really only at the club for a season and a half, joining in this January or February, and then essentially he got sold to Burnley as part of not the deal that got Diame, but it was basically a swap where we paid pretty much a similar fee to West Ham to get Diame. So arguably you say, maybe Diame's an upgrade on Boyd, but it's a bit of it was that sort of that summer window where it's a bit of a shame we didn't get more out of Boyd at the club. It was, it was a really promising spell that he had here.
It really was. And then I do remember there was periods where he was plagued with injury, which in hindsight is, as you said, that surprised me that he only did have a season and a half, because it did feel like he had a longer lasting impact, particularly when you consider that he did have some injury problems.
Yeah, no, that's right. And then the other one, I guess, was the loan out of Cameron Stewart as well. It was pretty much the end of his time at City as well. We've sort of touched on in previous episodes the struggles that he had at the club, but probably in a similar vein to Cooper, where you think at the time maybe it's a bit of a shame that he's not made it at City, but sort of in hindsight, in retrospect, you think it was, a fair enough move to make. We didn't really lose out too much on him leaving the club.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that, the promise that he showed and what he ended up delivering in the end was a far cry, because I still remember just watching highlights of many of the games, and it was pretty much the Cameron Stewart show. Often no end product, but the way that he would dribble at defenders reminds me very, very similar traits to what Kane Lewis-Potter does when he terrorizes defenders, when he breaks through on that wing. So yeah, it's a sad end for Cameron Stewart with his time at City, but yeah, certainly not someone who I think was hugely missed in that respect.
No, certainly. We'll talk now we'll round things off. We'll talk about some of our highlights from the games in that second half of the season. And I think, as you sort of touched on earlier, and so did I, that the second half of the season, we only had the 9 wins for that second half of the season compared to 15 in the first half of the season, which, when you sort of think about it, it's amazing how many sort of points we had on the board early in the season to maintain that spot in the top 2. And I think we sort of touched on it in the last episode, that there's that memory of that last 4 games of the season where we'd beaten Ipswich, and I think it was Proschwitz who got the 2 goals against Ipswich. Oh, no, that was first half of the season. It was Brady and Corrin got the goals against Ipswich. We beat Ipswich, and it was basically the case that we just had to win one of our last 4 games to go above to stay above Watford and to confirm the automatic promotion spots. And we went to Wolves, we went to Bristol City, we went to Barnsley, and I think we got the 0-0 draw with Bristol City, but losses to Wolves and Barnsley at the time, neither of which being great clubs, in great form, I should say. Left us feeling a bit twitchy heading to that final day of the season, but it was a bit of a nervy end to that season.
It certainly was, and I remember this vividly because I was actually at Portman Road for the victory, and in that Ipswich game that you're talking about. And I still remember catching the train home, and there was an old man who was far too intoxicated, and he hopped on the train singing Stevie Bruce was having a party to himself, and the carriage just arrived. It was a really special time, and I think at that point, on that exact day, there was another result where I'm pretty sure Peterborough had upset Watford, and it was maybe it was 3-0. It was I don't know if I'm remembering this correctly, so you might need to fact check.
Right? Yeah, I'll check it.
It was an incredible surprise to everybody, and as the results were coming through, you could hear the goal updates, and then when we read ahead. It was just an incredible feeling in the away stand at Portman Road, and watching people jump down the aisle to celebrate with each other. There really was a sense that we were going up, and as you mentioned, that particularly that away loss to Barnsley, that was soul destroying, because it seemed like the most likely chance we had of securing our fate, and when it wasn't taken, we know the rest. But setting up that final day with Cardiff, seemed like an incredibly unfortunate circumstance given the position that we had put ourselves in.
Yeah, I remember. I think I was out in the city for something, and I found a bar that had, back in the day, the old Setanta Sports that had the championship games, and I think they televised each of our last 4 games because they kept thinking this would be the game that we'd be promoted in. So it was actually great because before the days of iFollow, being able to watch all of our games was a real treat. And we, the loss to Wolves, the loss to Barnsley, the Barnsley loss in particular, because, watching that game, you just thought this would be it. We've had our sort of stumble, but we know what we need to do and we'll get it done. And we didn't. You've got a good memory. I was just having a look. So they lost 3-2 to Peterborough, but they were down 3-0. So that might have been the moment that you were thinking of when they're down 3-0 in that game. But yeah, so Watford were really stumbling as well. And it was really just a case that we just needed to have a win. They beat Blackburn 4-0 and then Leicester 2-1 heading into their last game as well. So it's not as if they were losing their last few games. They were really kind of closing in on us. So the frustration that we couldn't get it done against Barnsley was immense, and took it to the final day. In a way, I suppose, looking back on it with the benefit of hindsight, you think, well, Cardiff were already up. They didn't have a whole lot to play for. Maybe it was actually a pretty decent fixture to get, but at the same time, you've still got a pretty quality opponent as well. So a few nerves heading into that one for sure. In terms of other kind of call-outs or highlights from that second half of the season, my memory as well is that 5-2 win against Birmingham City, which was actually on my birthday, with, Boyd getting 2, Ghetto getting 2, and Corrin getting 1 as well. Around that time, I think we had a pretty good record against Birmingham. We seemed to be smashing them in most games. But you look at the scores around it. We'd lost 4-1 to Bolton in the game before that, and then we lost 4-2 to Palace the game after that. So being involved in, what's that, 7, 12, 18 goals in 3 games is a very non-Steve Bruce sort of situation to find yourselves in, but at least getting the 5-2 win at Birmingham in amongst that.
And absolutely. And now that you've just mentioned that some of those crucial games, there's one game that does stand out to me that I still feel aggrieved to this day. And that is the 4-2 loss to Crystal Palace at Selhurst Park. I remember this because, sometimes there's those moments in football when you feel robbed. But
Yeah.
I would love to go back and watch the highlights of this game, because I swear blind that Crystal Palace were given 2 penalties in that game that were not even close to being anything that you could remotely regard as a penalty. And I remember watching the highlights maybe 5 or 6 times, looking for a case to see, how it could potentially have been awarded a pen. And it was a proper disgrace of a refereeing form that day. And I still hold on to it, obviously. But yeah, it was just one of those crucial results. And I do remember Palace were, up around the top of the table at this stage as well. And I remember it being a crucial game for us, because I thought if we could get a point here, it would really set us up. And I thought we played really well. I'd love to go back now as we reflect on this and see what Steve Bruce's post-match press conference was, because I'm sure that there was a little bit of controversy around it.
Well, it's funny you say that, because there's a brilliant documentary on Amazon called, I want to say it's called When Eagles Soar or something like that. It's all about that season for Crystal Palace, because they came out of administration a season or 2 before that, and it's all about their promotion to the Premier League. And there is an episode where they're showing the various highlights of Zaha kind of ripping up the league, and they've got the 4-2 result against City and the goals that they scored in that one. And I'm just looking at it. Yeah, they had 2 penalties in the game. I think Stockdale saved one of them, but they got the other one. Steve Bruce's comments, he says, "I've no complaints with the result, but that may be the worst penalty I have ever seen. It was a shocking decision. Referees make the decisions, but we have to live with them." So I don't think he was particularly happy with the penalty decision.
Yeah, no, and fair enough too. I think that's my homework. After we get off air, I'm going to go and find footage of that, because it was an out and out disgrace.
Yeah, no, that's right. That's right. Yeah, look, apart from that, I mean, there's not a whole lot of standout results in that second half. I mean, we sort of touched on the couple there, and it really was just a case of grinding out those results. There's that stretch in February when Ghetto was scoring in just about every game. That 2-1 derby, the game that I was actually thinking of, is actually El Mohammadi who got the goal in the 87th minute, but Ghetto had scored earlier in that game. I do remember that one reasonably well, but there was that stretch of games where we just had to get the wins on the board, and Ghetto and Elmo, and again, like, they scored both goals in that Blackburn game as well. Ghetto got the winner against Charlton as well. So Elmo as well at the time was in pretty incredible goal scoring form as a right wing back. And I mean, we'll probably talk about it more with the Premier League season when we get to those flashback episodes. But you see so many Premier League sides now playing with 3 at the back. But I remember at the time when Bruce set us up with 3 at the back, it was seen as quite strange and quite revolutionary at the time, because everyone was just so used to playing with 4 at the back. And it's kind of funny when people sort of talk about Bruce as a dinosaur, or, not being very into his tactics and that sort of thing. But the way he set us up just saw us through that season so well.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, when you reflect on it now and you realize the caliber of Robbie Brady, particularly at the time, and El Mohammadi, what was asked of them with those guys, bombing on, they were in all sense of the words, like out and out fullbacks. And it was incredible to watch just the amount of running. I remember being at the KCOM, because that was a year that I was over there. And I was there for 2 patches of the season, later in the year and then the Christmas period. And I just remember kind of sitting in the East Stand and watching them. And I could not believe, I was kind of in awe about being at the ground and just seeing the distances that they were able to cover. So yeah, great shout out to see what those guys were able to accomplish. And as you said, the system that Bruce adopted obviously was, perfect for the championship.
That's right. That's right. Well, that's just about it. I guess, were there any final thoughts or overriding feelings from that season that you wanted to call out that we haven't touched on yet?
Look, I think we've touched on it, but I still just will never, ever be able to fathom the fact that Paul McShane was responsible for the goal that got City up. I don't think he scored in 4 years. And for him to pop up with a very Paul McShane-esque goal, I guess if you were, to guess how Paul McShane would score, that's probably how you would, imagine it. Him just wrestling another defender and having
funneling it in. Yeah.
in, but it was pure heart, and how he ran over to the Sky camera and pushed it out the way when they got it in his face. Like those scenes were just remarkable.
And we had all the Irish. You had Quinn, you had McShane, you had Brady, all sort of together, and it was that core of players, as you said, that it was just brilliant to see.
Yeah, and we talked about the Egyptian contingent as well, and the role that they had, but it was really interesting to see how Bruce built that team. He had his Irish core, he had the English lads that really galvanized, and had that, I guess, maybe brought the club culture, but just the balance where he was able to bring in that Egyptian flair, and even players like Nick Proschwitz, who was pretty much a forgotten man this season, but did score really crucial goals for us. It was just an incredible time, and looking back at those players, it was such a balance of emerging players and players that really were reasonably unknown. Like I remember the signing of Nick Proschwitz was from Paderborn or somewhere relatively unknown, and he demanded quite a fee, and he was very slow to get going. So I remember people scratching their head thinking, what kind of signing is this? And then I guess.
Then you look at like Shani Aluko joining on a free, so you have the impact that he had as well.
That's right. It was an incredibly diverse playing roster, yet at the same time, it had such a positive core. So a team that I really enjoyed watching. And as we reflect on this, I know that promotion's probably the thing that we remember the most, but it was such a ride to see players come in, go out, and all contribute. And we know how many players of this particular group went on and solidified themselves as regular Premier League footballers. So fair play.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm looking forward to covering off that 13-14 season as well, because there's some pretty fantastic memories that season as well. But look, until next time, thanks for joining me for this one, Logan.
My pleasure. Good to be here.
No worries. And thanks everyone for listening in. We'll be back with our regular podcast tomorrow to reflect on both the Barnsley game and also the QPR game from the weekend. But until next time, come on, City.